Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar today on how to implement an effective video content retention strategy. There'll be a Q&A at the conclusion of the webinar and the recording will be made available later on this week. So in terms of an agenda, here's what we're going to be going through today. We're going to be navigating through a range of topics as seen here, and this will all culminate at the end in a demo of MEDIAL where we'll show you how to do all of this live in a browser. So first things first, let's talk about budgeting, because this is something that's on everyone's mind these days. Did you know that the cost of cloud storage has been steadily increasing? And without a strategy, your video library could become a financial burden. So here's an example. One of our customers actually found that over 30% of their stored video hadn't been viewed in the last 2 years. And we helped them by archiving or deleting these videos, and they've actually saved thousands of dollars annually on storage costs. With MEDIAL, you can create all of these things within our Content Policies feature. For instance, you can set a policy to archive videos older than a specific date, or even delete content that hasn't been accessed in a while. So here's a question for you. How often do you actually review your video content for relevance? I'm suspecting if you're attending today that the answer to that question is probably rarely. And if the answer to the question is rarely, then you're probably paying for storage that you don't need. By implementing smart strategies, you can redirect some of those funds to more impactful projects, like for example, creating fresh, high quality content, which is much more useful than retaining content that isn't. We'd actually recommend doing this process yearly, and we'll talk through some examples of that later on in the demo. Now, next let's talk about content hygiene. Now this is a term that many people might not be aware of, but we're going to go through it now. Think of content hygiene like cleaning out your digital closet. Just like you wouldn't keep outdated clothes that no longer fit you and are no longer useful, you shouldn't really keep videos that no longer serve a purpose in your video library. Here's why that's important. Think of outdated videos not just taking up space, but also creating confusion and potentially even legal risks. For example, imagine a student watching a video about an old policy and acting on that outdated information. The result could be that mistakes are made that could easily be avoided. To tackle this, you need a robust content hygiene policy. The best way to do this is just to start by engaging stakeholders, faculty, administrators, even students, and explain the benefits of having a clean, relevant library. This could be just the fact that it's more organized, but also the fact that it's faster to navigate, there are reduced risks, and basically, in basic terms, improved user experience as well. Let me share a quick tip. MEDIAL's archiving tools, you can give them to stakeholders and they create a sense of control. For instance, you could create an archive folder where faculty can safely store materials that they don't want to lose. This builds trust and ensures that everyone feels included in the process. Now let's tackle an essential distinction between storage and archiving. Not all videos need to be immediately accessible, so you can move them to what we call the freezer, archival storage. Think of it in this way. Your active library is like your refrigerator. It holds everything that you need, all of your essentials for every day. And your archiving is like a freezer where you store items that you only need occasionally. Here's how MEDIAL simplifies that process. You can create a workflow to archive older content, and if no one uses it in a particular period of time, it can actually be permanently deleted. So in the picture here, we've set an archive policy that will actually permanently delete the content after a year. This ensures that your active library remains fresh while still preserving some valuable content for potential future use. So here's another question for you. What's currently in your refrigerator that actually needs to go in your freezer or even in the trash? Think about how much easier your library would be to manage if outdated content was handled regularly. Finally, let's look at quality. Users expect high value videos and engaging ones as well. We know that. But the quality isn't just about the production value of the video. It's about relevance and accessibility. MEDIAL offers analytics tools to identify which videos are most engaging and useful. This data helps you prioritize what you need to do with that content. MEDIAL's closed captioning functions can also help to reinvigorate content. Most people don't consider this a tool, but closed captions, not only do they increase your reach by providing for those with additional needs, they also have a huge effect on retention and comprehension. And we also have to consider that today's students are very comfortable with watching videos silently with captions, as this is often the default on most of the social media platforms. Plus, with MEDIAL's editing facilities, you can refresh older content to align with your current standards without starting from scratch at all. For example, you might take an amazing lesson from 5 years ago where there are some outdated things that you can edit. Or you might choose to use our export function where you can create bite-sized chunks out of the video without having to re-record the video again. So here's another question. Think of one video that's in your library currently that's popular that could do with a refresh. What changes would you make to improve it? This could be your next action step off the back of this webinar. Remember, when you change a video in MEDIAL, it's not like YouTube where you're losing all your analytics and you're losing the link to the video and the embed code. When you do it in MEDIAL, you can just re-upload over the top and it'll maintain all of that for you. So that's it for the first part of the presentation. Let's move on to a demo and I'll show you how we can do all of this in MEDIAL. So here we are in the back end of MEDIAL. We're logged in as an admin and we can see all of the different options and things that we can do with MEDIAL. The one that we're going to concentrate on today though is the Content Policies feature. So if we go into here, there's a few examples of things set up that I'm going to run through these examples because these are sort of pretty useful things that you can do with the software and they might apply to the use case that you have. But first what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk through the basics of what a content policy is and the things that can be done with it. So you can set a name and a description. That's pretty obvious. This is just what it does and this is a bit more detail on what it does. You can, if you want to, actually run a policy based on a list of IDs. You can run a report in MEDIAL and I can show that. And this allows you to cut and paste in all of those IDs into here and then just run an archiving policy based on those IDs. You have to run a report to do that, but you can do it just based on IDs. So all of this other criteria below that we're going to go through, that doesn't apply at all if you do it that way. This is more of like a sort of a databasey way of doing it. The other things that you can do is set a date range, so a kind of before and an after, and I'll go through that in terms of a really well-used use case, which is basically archiving off student assignment submissions, where we can create a before and an after date for an academic year. The other thing is whether you want to archive off things that haven't been played since a certain date, and again you can set the date for that as well. And you could even set like a play value as well. So if you wanted to archive off everything that hadn't been played, that had been played less than twice or once in the year, then you could do that as well. Setting that as 0 just essentially makes it ignore that value there. Another interesting thing here, and this is part of one of my examples as well, is you can actually completely exclude any media that's in an LMS. So MEDIAL, as you know from using it, you can use our kind of portal, which is called the MEDIAL Library, and you can use MEDIAL Learning, which is all of our integrations with the LMS systems. What a lot of our customers want to do is do that. Just don't delete anything that's in the LMS because they want to maintain that in there because they've got particular policies on having that content in the LMS, and they only want this content policy to apply for anything that isn't in the LMS. What you can do as well, and a number of our customers do this, is you can apply a policy to just one LMS. So each LMS has a key and a secret associated with it. So if you wanted to only archive content for a particular LMS, you could do that as well, and then maintain all of the other ones. The example of that I'll go through in a second, where I've picked out a particular faculty that I want to archive the content for. Once you've decided on this kind of criteria here, like date criteria or number of plays, or whether you want to exclude an LMS or whatever, you can just say, well, I want to apply this to absolutely everything, or you can filter it even further. So one of the filters that you can do is just by user. It's doubtful you'd do that, because this is just drilling it down to 1 or 2 users. You can do it by group as well. This is really useful for things like student assignment submissions, where you can apply this to a group, students, for example. That would filter that down so that you just get the student work. You can do it by category. This is relevant to medial categories or folders, or whatever you want to call it. You can do this. This would be more, the example here would be things like where you've got categories that have got old information in them and you want to archive those off. And you can also do it by course as well. And I'll run through an example of that when I look at my content policies list in a second. So this could be, I've got an LMS, I want to archive everything off for that particular course because we're not running it anymore, or we haven't run it for several years. We'll apply this to everything. And then you basically decide, what do you actually want to do? Once you've set all this criteria, do you want to just archive this content to a particular path, or do you want to permanently delete it? If you archive it, you can also optionally permanently delete it as well. So a great example of this would be archiving off content right now, storing on much, much cheaper storage, and then when it comes to it after a year and nobody's moaned about it, the content would get automatically deleted. The whole point of this really, and it's something that I haven't really mentioned in this webinar thus far, is that what you're trying to do is, yes, create a clean library where you've got only content that's relevant, but also you're trying to save money here as well, because storage that you're streaming content from costs a lot more money than cold storage, or this idea of the freezer, as I said in the webinar, where you basically can put the content on much, much cheaper storage. So if you're a customer that's running us on premises, this could just be a drive letter that you're archiving out to, and you could put that on much cheaper storage. If you're a customer that's running on our SaaS platform, we can basically set up markedly cheaper storage on Azure, which is Azure Blob Storage, and we can map that to your MEDIAL instance so that you can archive off to that as well. And that storage costs a fraction of the cost of putting it on your live storage. So now that we've seen the bones of what a content policy is, let's go and have a look at some example policies so we can just put a bit of meat on the bones of this. So let's start with this one here. This is one that I've done for a few customers recently. This is a student submissions content policy. So we'll go into it and we'll see how I've configured this so that if you come to do this at a later date, you can kind of copy what I've done. So my library doesn't have very, very old content in it. It's only got content from 2024 in it. So what I've done is I've basically mimicked the 2024 academic year. So I've said the academic year would start in 2024, so 1st of September. It would finish in by the 1st of September 2025. I mean, you might want to put this to July or something whenever the year finishes. And what I'm looking to do is archive off all of those student submissions because I don't need them. The likelihood of you archiving off stuff from this academic year is low, but you might want to do this for 2022 or 2021 or something like that. But the theory is exactly the same. The dates are just different. So I set my dates, and then all that I do, my criteria is just basically to do it for specific users. For specific groups of users. So you'll see what I've done is my selected groups are students and LTI students. So I'm just covering both of the bases here. My system is connected up to Microsoft Azure. So we have a group called students in there, and LTI students is a group of built-in student users in an LMS. But normally you would just use this group called LTI students. So I've selected everything for students. I've basically defined a date range, and I know that I'm going to take in all of the assignment submissions by doing that. And I've decided I'd like to just archive these off to much, much cheaper storage. And all I need to do after that is just run it. What it then gives me is a whole list of all of the content here that applies to that policy. So you can see everything's here. It's showing me the number of plays, it's showing me who the content is, and it'll also show me how much storage I'm going to save by doing it. And as I uncheck items from here as well, you'll see that this number changes. So if you go into this view here and you think to yourself, oh my goodness, I don't really want to get rid of that one, I don't want to get rid of that one, then you can just uncheck them and it'll change the amount of storage that you've saved. You can extract this out as a report if you want to as well. Not many people do that, if I'm honest, but it will allow you to do that so that you know what you've done. Now, the key question is here is people say, well, do I really want to do that? Because what if an examining board comes along and says, we would quite like to have a look at that student submission from the academic year 2024. How would I possibly get that back if I've archived it? How would I put that back into MEDIAL? And the answer to that question is pretty easy. So once you've run it, and I haven't run my student submission ones, but I have got an example of one that I've run here, you basically just click on restore. That's it. You click on restore, and this will bring back everything that you've archived off. Now bear in mind here, I've only got one piece of content in here, but you would have hundreds of them. So let's say the examiner had asked for John Smith's student submission and they wanted to see that. How would you archive that? So you would click on the search, you would search for that person's name, and when it was brought up in the list of media, you would just check that item and click on restore. It would show you how much space that would take up when you restore it. You click on restore and that content would go straight back into MEDIAL and all of the links that would work previously would work again. So you can not only archive off all of these student submissions that probably won't be needed because they're submissions that happened a year or 3 years ago or whatever, but you also have the safety factor of being able to restore them if they are required later on down the line. And you're restoring them from very cheap storage to more expensive storage that you're streaming them from. If you want to archive it off again, you can again repeat the process and archive that media back to the cheaper storage. So that's one example. That's a really, really nice example that I've had a lot of customers ask for. So let's look at another policy, which is archiving any content not played in the last year, but actually specifically excluding the LMS. So again, here's my ready-made example here. I'm essentially saying that anything not played since a certain date, November 2023, I'm then excluding anything that's in my LMS, and I'm applying that to all content and then running that policy. So that's possible as well. That's another example policy. It's a little bit less involved than the one that we did before, but again, we can do something similar to that. Then let's look at another one, archiving content from a particular course. I've had this asked for quite a few times. So this might be, I have a particular course in my LMS. I want to archive all content from that course because I'm not running that course anymore. And then eventually I just want that content to be deleted. So what would we do there? We don't really have to set any date range as such. All that we need to do is specify, apply it to, and in my case, a course. And what I did earlier is I selected this particular course, this QA Canvas course. And then when I run that, that will basically bring back everything that's from this course and I'll be able to select it. So I'm archiving off to a particular folder and I've decided to permanently delete it after X amount of days. When I run that, you'll see here, this brings back everything that's in that course, and I can choose to select those or not. And it's warning me here that this will be deleted after 365 days. Another policy that's also worth talking about is excluding a particular Moodle or a particular Canvas or a particular Blackboard. So we've got lots of customers that run multiple Moodles, for example. So this one's a really good policy, an example of that policy. So let's say this university has got a faculty of arts who have a Moodle. and we want to basically just archive all of that stuff off. We don't apply any date ranges to it or anything. I mean, we could do it for a particular year, and then we just select that particular LMS platform. So you'll see here, this has a drop-down list that's got the keys and the secrets of all of the platforms that we're running, and then we just decide to archive it off. That's it. Run that. That'll just bring back everything from that particular Moodle instance. So it's pretty powerful. There's lots of stuff that you can do with it. You can archive then delete, you can restore from an archive. But the main point here is that what you're trying to do is you're trying to get your library cleaner and get your library with relevant content in it. But the additional benefit of that is you're basically saving money because you're putting it on cheaper storage. If you're doing that on-prem, you're putting it on cheaper storage that you have and you manage yourself. If you're doing it on our SaaS platform, we're allowing you to archive that stuff off to much cheaper storage. And if you want kind of pricing for that cheaper storage, we're going to release a product which is called MEDIAL Locker that does that. At the moment, we kind of do it for customers on sort of a piecemeal basis, but we are going to be productizing that for people that want to store much larger amounts of content ongoing. It might be that we've included that in your agreement anyway already, but yeah, we can definitely do that for you. So that's it. That's the demo. We'll now go to a Q&A session. So if you've got any questions at all, pop them in the chat or the Q&A, and I'll answer them now.